What's up folks, Moon here. What do you value more, freedom or fairness? Not to get too philosophical up in here though, because today we're addressing a hot topic regarding Battleground Blitz. That being if there should be specialization limits in the game. As it stands now, there isn't a cap on how many of the same spec can be on a team, meaning that in theory you could end up against a team of double Mistweavers and half a dozen subtlety rogues, while your team is stuck with a noticeably weaker composition. While I have my own thoughts on the matter, I'd like to make this video to explore the pros and cons of what implementing a specialization limit could mean for Battleground Blitz. So let's start off with the pros. Addressing the elephant in the room, imposing a specialization limit could massively improve team balance. While there are multiple factors such as decision making and objective play that goes into winning a game of Battleground Blitz, it feels awful loading into a lobby knowing that you're at a drastic disadvantage prior to the gates opening. By capping how many players can use a specific spec, you could avoid situations where one team has an overwhelming advantage just because they are stacked with stronger specializations. Teams with 4 Death Knights or 5 Rogues would be forced to diversify, leading to a more balanced and competitive match. Regarding comp diversity, capping the amount of specs one team could have could encourage players to experiment with different roles and classes. This would mean a chance at seeing more unique and varied gameplay rather than seeing the same 5 to 6 specs dominate match after match. It could also open up the potential for more strategic depth, where teams would have to think carefully about synergy and role coverage. Another big plus to this would be more class representation. Right now, some specs rarely see play in the higher end of the Blitz ladder because they're overshadowed by meta picks. With the spec limit, you would see more underrepresented specs get their time in the spotlight, which could lead to a healthier and more dynamic meta across the board. Of course, as with any change, there's bound to be drawbacks. One of these downsides is that it would lead to increased queue times. If everyone's trying to queue up as the same popular spec, like a Mistweaver Monk or a Subtlety Rogue, you could end up waiting longer for a match. The system might struggle to balance teams without making players wait. Another major issue which would see a change like this would be reduced player freedom. A good amount of players enjoy mastering a specific specialization, and being forced to switch because your spec is popular in the meta can feel limiting. There's something to be said when it comes to forcing people onto roles and classes they're less comfortable with, as it can make for an unfun player experience. And of course, going to the main theme for this discussion being balance, figuring out how to implement a fair cap could be tricky. A poorly implemented cap could create even new problems down the line, such as making certain specs mandatory as opposed to fostering comp diversity. Then you'd also have to consider if you were to limit specializations that you may just end up shifting the meta rather than solving the problem. A team could in theory still have 3 rogues if one plays subtlety, one plays outlaw, and the third plays assassination. You would still experience the same issues, just underneath a different coat of paint. So what would be the alternative then? Well, one potential solution would be to do something like in solo shuffle where there's a soft spec limit, and this is where the matchmaking system will try to balance a certain number of specs without completely restricting them. That way, teams are less likely to end up with, say, 6 balanced druids, but players still have the freedom to play what they enjoy. Another option could be to offer incentives for players who pick underrepresented specs. This could be something similar to the field medic's hazard payout boxes that healers receive in solo shuffle, albeit I think there needs to be some modification for the incentive to actually be worth picking an underrepresented class over. When I think of other games such as League of Legends, or if we're even sticking with Blizzard, we can use Overwatch as an example, with those types of games you queue up as a specific role, and whichever hero or champion you play is designed to fill that role for your team. What's fascinating about World of Warcraft is that you can have multiple classes underneath the same umbrella role, but is separate from their role within a team composition as to what their playstyle is. With the healer example, a Holy Paladin is played drastically different from a Restoration Shaman. Whereas a Holy Paladin has strong defensive cooldowns which can be used reactively to keep their team alive, Resto Shaman has to rely on being aggressive with its disruption and utility as its defensive cooldowns are much weaker in Battleground Blitz. Both of these specializations fall underneath the healer category, but how their role is played in a team is vastly different from each other. The same principle applies in which both a Subtlety Rogue and a Fury Warrior are considered DPS, but the way their actual playstyle contributes to a team composition vastly differs from each other. So back to the example with other games, you queue up as the role first, and then you pick a class that can help facilitate that role. Whereas with Blitz, you're loading into a game with random classes and vaguely determined roles, and then spend the 2 minutes before the game starting figuring out what your actual role will be and helping your team win the game. I don't think Blizzard will ever put this much stock into the mode, but maybe segmenting as to what each of the classes' roles are could help as to which specializations they should look for to fill out a team composition. When it comes to player preference, I'm sure there's also a split amongst the player base as to the people who enjoy the current randomness of the team compositions, whereas other players are hoping something like spec limits are added into the game as soon as possible. As for myself, I am personally in favor of spec limits, but I think going about the soft cap route would be the best course of action so that you're not completely restricting player freedom. Although I'll admit that I'm slightly biased in this matter, as my main specialization is one that's not considered meta. But that'll do it for today. I just wanted to make a quick video discussing spec limits, as now that we're a few weeks into the new mode, we have a better idea as to some of the challenges it faces. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below, and until next time, this is Moon, signing out.